How's it going, guys? It's your boy Kanji FPL and welcome back to the channel. On today's video, we're going to be doing a quick deep dive into the best strikers to be targeting into our game week 1 squads. We have to start the conversation with the robot Erling Haaland. Now, Haaland in his debut season put up a 270 point plus FPL season, but his underlying XG in his first season and his second season are actually quite similar. However, he actually underperformed his XG this season. He put up 29.5 XG, but only scored 27 goals. Now, that's a small underperformance, but it's about those little marginal things. For example, if you went against Haaland in the first season, you would have got slaughtered. But if you went against Haaland in the second season, you would have been slaughtered, but just not as bad. So I just feel like when we're looking at Haaland's season as a whole, he did regress from last year, playing less minutes because of the foot injury he picked up and also scoring less goals in general. However, if we look at the data, he put up an underlying XGI of 31.5 and he put up 35 fantasy goals and assists. So I feel like he's doing his job. And with Haaland, it's not really about his price. It's not really about his value. It's more so about captaincy, because a lot of us are going to be captaining Haaland a majority of the game weeks. So I feel like if they underprice him, it makes the game too easy in terms of being able to build such a great squad full of wonderful FPL picks. So for me, I think they should keep his value at 14, but they do have a reason to drop him because he has regressed based on his XG over performance from his debut season. Moving into the next tier of strikers, we've got Ollie Watkins and Alexander the Great Alexander Isak. So I do feel like these two strikers stand out above all of the other strikers in the Premier League because they just have a level of consistency. Both of them average over 6 points per start whenever they play 90 minutes. And that tells you all you need to know. If they're starting and they're not getting injured, they're probably going to put 6 points right into your FPL team. It's just so valuable from the striker position that you should be paying a premium for a striker like that. Pricing Watkins at 10 and then pricing Isak at 9 is very fair. If I feel like Isak is 1.0 cheaper than Watkins, then I would probably just put Isak into my team because they average very similar FPL points per start. But here's the thing. Isak is very injury prone. I mean, look at the minutes played this season, 2,200 minutes versus 3,200 minutes. Focusing specifically on Watkins first, looking at his underlying data of 21 XGI and picking up 37 returns, that is a massive amount of overperformance. And the question I wonder is that, is it sustainable? When we're looking at it from an XG perspective, he put up around 17 XG and scored 19 goals. And I think for me, that's just normal. That's just normal overperformance. There's no issue there. It just comes down to the expected assist. He put up 4 expected assists, but ended up with 18 fantasy assists. That's insane. Now, I think if you put up 4 expected assists, I think it's normal for you to end up with 10, especially because FPL classifies rebound goals as assists. So I think that's fair. But to me, I just remember so many countless moments of Watkins running to the byline, cutting a pass all the way to the top of the box, and you see McGinn or Douglas Luiz banging the goal in from outside the box, and you're just like, wow. Like, it was just unbelievable. And that's just what made Watkins get to that next level of consistency. And I just feel like some of those assists were kind of fluky. So in my mind, I'm going to be taking off 10 assists for him right off the bat. I think you should probably expect 30 returns from him next season because of the news that Douglas Luiz is actually left to join Juventus, meaning that Ollie Watkins should be the number 1 option to be taking penalties for Aston Villa. That's just another string to add to his bow. Watkins easily just feels like the type of striker that you're going to put into your FPL team. You don't have to worry about him. He pretty much plays every single game and gets you 200 points. The question is, like, will he be worth the value at the price that he comes in at? If he comes in at 10, I think that's the type of player you can consider, but his true value to me is more so at the 11 because there are so many strikers that I really don't trust to do what he can do. Moving on to Alexander Isak, an interesting stat about him is that Alexander Isak boasts the highest underlying baseline bonus for any FPL striker in the game, meaning that for any striker that picks up a goal or an assist, Isak is the most likely player to pick up a bonus point. So his goals or assists are not really just worth 4, they're really worth 5. To me, I do feel like there's a ticking time bomb on Alexander Isak's time at Newcastle. I know he's injury prone, but he's definitely past Newcastle's level. No disrespect to Newcastle United fans, but I just feel like Isak is the type of player that should be challenging for Premier League titles, not challenging for top 4 races. In Alexander Isak's debut season, he put up 100 FPL points. He put up 8 XGI and got 10 goals in his first season, and of course it was riddled with injuries. Going into his second season where he's more adapted to the Premier League, he puts up a very strong return, and I do feel that what he did this year is completely sustainable. There wasn't very much overperformance. In fact, I'd probably expect more overperformance because he's such a classy player. So with Isak, I don't think there's any issues or any question marks with what he's done, and I would completely expect him to do exactly what he did. He just has to avoid injuries, and he'd be a great FPL pick. Moving into the next tier of strikers, these are the types of strikers that I think can easily be putting up a minimum of 150 points, but with a maximum of 200 points. I do not see them outscoring the 200 point mark at all. Even if they pick up form, they could become some of the best assets to own, but I just feel like their ceiling is capped. And I'll go through all of the options individually, starting off with the most controversial player in Kai Havertz. Now, Havertz was very talismanic for Arsenal. If you're going to be the striker for Arsenal, which is what he played for a majority of the season, how can you only have an underlying XGI of 16? This is the type of striker that's supposed to be picking up 20 to 25 plus goals. How are Arsenal supposed to win the Premier League unless your striker is putting up goals like this? It just doesn't make sense. Like 23 returns is great, but he only scored 13 goals. So that means that he picked up 10 assists, which you think is great, but that's probably assists that he's getting from rebound assists because he missed his like high XG opportunity. The Arsenal spots are so precious in your team. And if you're not going to be going for Saka and Arsenal have a great fixture, would you potential captain Havertz? Yes, you would, because he's so talismanic. He plays right down the middle in great positions. How much upside does a player like him have? The thing is that the Arsenal striker spot is a gold mine. And to me, if you put Alexander Isak in Havertz's spot, I think Arsenal would win the Premier League. But that's my own personal bias. If you go for somebody like Havertz, it's really, really tricky because he picked up 180 points this season, but he was a midfielder. So you got to take away 16 points from the clean sheets that he got. You also got to take away 13 points because he got an extra point for a goal that he scored as a midfielder. So you take away 30 points, but you probably add back between 5 to 10 points because strikers usually pick up more bonus points when they score. So let's just take away 20 points from his total score. So that his total score goes from 180 to 160. Now that should be his baseline. There's no way Havertz does worse than what he did this year. I think this is the type of thing where we can see him kick on and grow. He's just too important. He plays too many minutes. He gets too many opportunities to get worse than that. I do expect him to pick up around 175, 180 points. I think he'll probably be matching what Solanke did this year. To me, I think Havertz needs to focus on his finishing. If he picks up 20 goals, he will probably be one of the most important strikers in FPL. But if he doesn't pick up 20 goals, then I just feel like he's irrelevant because we'll be doubling up on the defense. I will probably have Saka or Odegaard because we can trust them to pick up 200 points as a third Arsenal asset. Moving on to Darwin Núñez and Cody Gakpo. Now, just as frustrating as Kai Havertz is, Darwin Núñez is the same thing, but like on steroids, where you're looking at Darwin's underlying XGI of 21, and he picks up 22 returns, and you think that's great, but he picked up an underlying XG of 16 and only scored 11 goals. So he pretty much had a very poor season and it never really turned around. But he had his moments. Like I'll never forget that performance away at Newcastle. But I just felt like overall as a season, it was a poor season for Darwin. I don't think that Gakpo will be getting any minutes at the striker position, but from an FPL perspective, Klopp played Gakpo a lot at the striker spot, so I do feel like FPL will put Gakpo as a striker. Now, throughout Gakpo's entire career, also at the Euros, before he was at Liverpool, he was usually playing as a left winger, and he's incredible in that role. You can see that he's the most important player in the Dutch team currently, and he's been thriving. The interesting thing is that I'm expecting Gakpo to be reversed out of position because I think he'll be playing left wing in real life, but he'll be a striker in FPL. Now, I just feel like because we're moving under a Dutch coach, the Dutch coach will look to favor Gakpo, and I do feel like Luis Diaz and Gakpo will both not be good FPL picks if they're both healthy because I think they'll take minutes away from one another. However, looking at Darwin in general, he picks up the underlying XGI, and I do feel like because of the fact Gakpo wants to be playing left wing, Darwin's minutes are more nil than they've ever been, and I just feel like if there's a differential to be bringing in from Liverpool, it's Darwin. Darwin is a very polarizing player to talk about because he has raw talent, raw ability, great jumping, great power, great strength, great speed, the runs, the space that he creates. His passing is also great for a striker. There are only two real issues with Darwin. The first is finishing, and the second is probably composure. And I'd say the third is going to be his timing of his runs. It really reminds me of the way that Ollie Watkins used to be in his first season when he was playing with Jack Grealish, where Watkins was always offside. Darwin feels like he's always a step ahead. It's similar to Nicholas Jackson. They just find themselves offside too often. And I do feel like once it clicks, Darwin will easily be a 200-point striker consistently for probably 5 or 6 years in a row, to the point where once Salah moves on to his next club, and even if McAllister is going to be on the penalties for Liverpool, I would expect Darwin to easily be the most important Liverpool player to be owning. I don't know when that moment's going to come. And the interesting thing is that Liverpool have very great fixtures to start the season. So if you want to be taking a punt, you would definitely be considering one of Gakpo or Darwin. Of course, you can consider Mo Salah, but it's just about the budget. Gakpo playing under a Dutch coach after having a world-class performance at the Euros, coming back to Liverpool, he could be a great differential to start the season. But for me, if there's a punt to be taking on Liverpool, it's Darwin, because he's the type of player that accumulates the XGI. He just has to put the ball in the back of the net, man. Moving on to Julian Alvarez, the backup striker for Man City. Can you believe this guy's a backup? Bro, he wouldn't be a backup on any other team in the world. Like, this guy is incredible. He's an XGI overperformer usually. Overall, if we look at his season data, he picked up 19 XGI and picked up 22 returns. The only issue with Alvarez is minutes. You know, in his first season, he got less minutes, picking up 100 points. This season, with the KDB injuries, with Gundogan and Morris leaving, they played Alvarez more minutes, kind of playing him in a cam position at times, but he picked up more minutes and got more returns. With Alvarez, you know exactly what you're getting. When there's an injury, you pick up Alvarez, you put him into your team. He's just a solid pick. And whenever Haaland is not in the team, he's going to be taking the penalties. When KDB's not on the team, he takes the direct free kicks as well as the corners. So he's going to be on set pieces. Alvarez is a wonderful pick. Moving on to Dominic Solanke, none of us will forget that double game week where we captained him and then he missed the penalty and then he ended up getting another goal anyway. But what a roller coaster. Based on what Solanke has done in previous seasons, he did take that next level up. Similar to what Tony was doing, not this year, but the season before for Brentford, where he felt so talismanic, always involved in every goal and an assist whenever Brentford was scoring. I felt the exact same way with Solanke this year. The fact that he's going to be on the penalties, talismanic for his team, meaning that he'll always be a very solid FPL pick. Even though Solanke is very talismanic for Bournemouth and he has a very strong goal involvement percentage, I just feel like when you're playing for a club like Bournemouth, I'm not expecting you to put up 250 points in a season. However, Solanke can potentially get there over time. I just feel like at this point, he needs to be consistent and trying to put up 180, 190, 200 points. That's kind of what I'm expecting from Solanke over the next 3 or 4 seasons. So I do feel like if we're pricing him in this bracket, he definitely should be at the cheaper end. However, with him, you have pros and cons. Lower ceiling, but higher floor, because you know exactly what you're getting from him. Nailed on, 90 minutes, on pens. He's a perfect FPL pick. Moving into the differential striker bucket, I've included Haaland, Tony, Cunha, and Matessa. Now, these are probably the 4 differential strikers I'll be keeping a very close eye on. The one that I'm very disappointed in has got to be Rasmus Haaland. I did feel like he'd be closer to the Darwin Núñez and Alvarez and Gakpo bucket. He'd be in that tier, but I just feel like he's really ghosted this year. Very disappointing season. For Denmark, he was pretty much invisible. For most of Man United's season, he was pretty much invisible, apart from that purple patch that he picked up. But that purple patch is just a sign of things to come. I do feel that under Erik ten Hag, Man United need to work on improving their identity, and somebody like Rasmus Haaland can thrive. And he's someone that I'm going to be keeping on my watch list, and I do feel like 7.0 is very fair. Moving on to Ivan Toney, 7 goals and assists is not that great. I know he had an underlying XGI of 7 as well, but in 1,500 minutes of a player of Ivan Toney's quality, I expect much more from him. And I do feel like this is a classic situation of somebody that had their mind elsewhere. Like, he was playing games, but he wasn't really mentally into it. After the whole betting scandal, it did feel like this was probably just going to be a wasted season for him, and that's kind of what happened. But I don't think the quality of the player has deteriorated at all. There's a reason that he's going to be part of the England squad. He's going to be taking penalties in the Euros for England because he's that great at them. He has an incredible record at taking penalties, and he's going to be very interesting because if he moves to a club like Man United, or if he moves to a club like Spurs, maybe he might take penalties off of Bruno or Son. So it's just something to keep in mind. To me, I think that Tony is a big game player. He is a standout in this category. To me, I think he is easily going to be better than players like Darwin Núñez and Gakpo currently. I just feel like he has to find his form again. So it's just something that I'm going to be keeping on my watch list 100%. I do feel like his true value is going to be at 8, and I think he'll be priced at 7, given what he did last year. It'll be interesting to see if he gets a move elsewhere or not. If he returns to Brentford versus if he goes to a different team, we have to see where he lands in the pecking order of the strikers at that club. So these two strikers were like the surprise package to me. When Cunha and Mateta scored the points that they did, I was wowed. Genuinely, when we're looking at the underlying XGI of 12 for Cunha, getting 19 returns, looking at Mateta, underlying XGI of 12, picking up 23, the question is it sustainable? With somebody like Mateta, I am very, very doubtful because of the fact that Elise has left. If Palace do not replace that creativity that Elise had that made it easy for Mateta, I feel like we could easily see him have a very poor season. The issue isn't the system that Glasner has. It's just replacing the talent of Elise. And potentially if Eze leaves as well, that could potentially mean that Mateta could be on the penalties, but maybe the creativity would just disappear from the team as a whole. And they could be closer to relegation than I think they currently are, which is closer to mid-table. So they're going to have to be somebody we keep an eye on during the transfer window to see what happens if they get a replacement or if anybody else leaves. Mateta and Cunha have very strong upside, though there is some rotation risk. I did see that Wolves signed a new striker, and with Mateta, you have Edouard that's always lurking in the shadows. And I think Mateta has earned the trust of all of the FPL fans as well as the coach based on what he did, and he's also double game week legend. So I think pricing Mateta, giving him a price rise to 7 is very fair based on what he did last year. Next, we'll be moving on to one of my Brighton strikers that I really like. It's going to be Joao Pedro. I didn't include Evan Ferguson because I don't exactly know what's happening over there, but Joao Pedro is going to be on the penalties for Brighton. Now, we did see that Pascal Gross also left, so that should completely nail him for the penalties for Brighton whenever he's on the pitch. The interesting thing is just minutes with him, because only playing 2,000 minutes means you're not nailed, and then it's hard to trust you. Whereas like when we look at somebody like Johan Wissa or Muniz, I do feel like they're actually nailed for their teams. Especially if Ivan Toney leaves, then I think Wissa would be a lock. Expect 10 goals, maybe a couple assists here and there. With Muniz, I do feel like he's the type of striker that can kick on based on the form that he had. I think he had an opportunity to take minutes away from Raul Jimenez, who was transferred from Wolves to Fulham. Then it's like Jimenez didn't really find his feet, and then Muniz took advantage of that opportunity and he announced himself. And I do feel that they might actually be underpricing Muniz, whereas true value could be closer to 7 or 7.5. So he's someone to definitely think about going into game week 1 as a differential pick if you're looking for a cheap striker. But I just think he's someone that we can just keep an eye on and then move to with one of our free transfers. Lastly, we've got the Chelsea strikers, man. Nkunku ghosted us this season. I don't even know what to price this guy at. Before, when Nkunku was in the Bundesliga, he was the player of the season. I can only judge what I saw, and I didn't see enough of him to say anything, so I'm just going to be keeping his price the way it was. With Jackson, okay, this guy has a lot of potential. It's raw, very similar to Darwin. It's just about if he can hone in and become more clinical with his chances. We saw that towards the end of the season, he became more clinical, whereas in the first part of the season, he was more wasteful. And I do feel like towards the end of the season, he earned the trust of the coach, but now Pochettino's gone. So he's under a new coach now, new system. Let's see how they'll use him. He's someone to definitely keep an eye on. And I think they'll price him at 7.5 based on the amount of returns that he got. But I do think his potential is going to be around the 8.0 price point. Unlike the midfielder position, when I filmed that video, I knew exactly which players I wanted in each tier. In the striker video, I do feel like there's a lot of moving parts. Havertz moving positions, Gakpo being reversed out of position, Darwin getting underlying XG but not finishing. Alvarez, he's a great pick when he gets the minutes. Solanke is a great template pick. There's lots of different things to really factor in when you're looking at the striker that you're looking to bring into your FPL squad. So it's hard for me to recommend anyone specifically, but I think if I'm going to recommend one that you should be starting with that I think is probably the best pick to go with, it's probably got to be Isak or Watkins. I feel like if you go with them, then you can see who's going to be great and who are the strikers that have the minutes that are in form, and then you can always move down from them. But if you start with somebody like a Haaland or a Toney or a Cunha, and then you see that Watkins and Isak are in form, it's hard to get the money to get up. So I think that's the only recommendation that I would give to you guys, is that to start with one of Watkins or Isak as your second striker, so that way you'll be able to move wherever you want.